So today, we're going to talk about using the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs Temperament Inventory to help other people. And let me just kind of review. The Enneagram increases our respect, our understanding, our compassion of the other person. You know where the other person is coming from a lot more. What's driving them. And we're better able to help people because we understand their motives. I had a directee who she was kind of a wild and crazy person, and I honestly I was never sure where we were going or what we were up to, and I sometimes I just was at a loss to know what to do. Then I started taking training about the Enneagram, and I asked her to take it, and everything became clear. I remember she walked in my house, hand on her hips, and she says, "Jan, I'm a 7. I'm an adventure enthusiast." And then she leaned over and she looked at me and she goes, "You always knew I was a hellraiser, didn't you?" I was like, "Oh gosh, how did I miss this?" And yeah, she was a 7. And it just helped me know that she needed to move from that wanting to do everything, wanting to have everything, to a place of just sustaining effort, a place of endurance, a place of fortitude. And then I felt like, okay, now we know where to go. That trajectory of growth is so helpful. I have a directee who is a 6, and she's an outpatient oncology nurse. And so her trajectory is from fear to courage. All I have to do is comment to her, "That was very courageous of you," and she lights up, helping her move towards courage in her life all the time. And this is important because people need a vision of their virtue. Just like we need a vision of life in the kingdom of God, we need a vision of what would it look like for me to move away from the passion, the shadow, towards the virtue. How would I behave if in her case, if I was more courageous? What would it look like for me to move towards courage? And then ask them what moves them towards that virtue, and to be able to work with that with them. So the growth takes place through clarification. What do I really think? What do I feel? What do I want in life? And so we ask questions. One of the best ways to do that is to ask the question, why? Sometimes that's a little harsh, so sometimes we just say, why would that be? And so we ask these questions. And sometimes I'll say, I have a pretty good idea of what your answer is to this question, but I'd love to hear how you would put it. Sometimes we just need to be with them in their passion as they move to that, because they've told us why, and then we see the passion, we see what's been driving them, we see what their fears are, moving towards their virtue, but we just need to be there with them. The story I told you about the directee who I suggested she stop reading the Bible for a while. She was a 9. She was very depressed. 9s often feel pressured to do things, to conform, and they need permission to live life their relational way because they don't fit in with that striving, driving American way of being. They are wonderful leaders in their very own way, and that's how we were able to help her. But we needed to do that. She needed to be free from a lot of the constrictions. So as you look at the sheet that you had, the original one, you'll notice that there's a mental habit for each Enneagram type. This is one of the most important things you can help people with, because that will tell you how the person you're working with, how they pay attention to the world. All my 1s, my 3s, my 5s, and 6s, they all beat themselves up. You're going to have to be with them, help them to be able to give themselves grace, let go of the guilt. You're going to want to be a good spotter. One of my favorite things about being a spiritual director is I spot when people are getting something right. So like I'll tell my 6 directee, you're moving towards courage. Or I'll tell my 9, you're moving towards purposeful action and away from all that inertia. Notice when your 7 is going through pain, well going, Oh, we actually looked at the pain and kept moving rather than self-medicating through the pain. You want to notice when the two had an opportunity to be codependent and they didn't do it. Instead, they didn't enable and they moved forward. So you want to be able to notice that. You want to be able to notice when in the middle of the conversation, all of a sudden, the person you're working with, their mental focus changes to that. I'm a one, and my mental focus changes to the resentment, to noticing what's wrong with people and really noticing what's wrong with me. I can remember my first spiritual director. I will never forget this. I was telling him about something that happened, and I started to beat myself up. And this very gentle, wise man, I remember he leaned forward to me and he goes, "What if we went to a different room? We always go to that room where you beat yourself up." And I remember just stopping and I was stunned that he said that. And I looked at him and I said, "Is there another room?" Well, there is. The virtue of serenity, the virtue of patience, that's where the one goes. He knew that that's the room we needed to go to. Scripture talks about the renewing of the mind, learning about the mental habit of each type of Enneagram, and learning that's the mental habit of the people that you're loving and serving. That can be one of the biggest helps to them. All you have to do is talk to me about serenity, and I just feel different because I know that's where I need to go. So pay attention to the mental habit. Notice when the person you love goes there. Another thing to pay attention to is the coping mechanism of the people you're dealing with. Your 2s and your 9s and your 7s, oh my goodness, they just get hooked on their positive outlook. They get so hooked on being positive that sometimes they just live in denial. I mean, things are falling apart, but they're thinking positive. And so you want to be able to kind of help them look a little bit more at reality and say, are you sure that's the way it really is? Or to even say, if things didn't go well, how would you be with that? What would you do to move forward? The 1s, the 3s, and the 5s, oh gee, we just are upping the competency, trying harder. It's amazing. You know, my spiritual director is always offering me the alternative idea that I could relax. You know, that never even occurs to me because my coping mechanism is I just got to try harder, work at it more. Gee, I could relax. What a thought. And then our 4s, our 6s, and our 8s are reacting. They're forgetting about what the real goal is in the situation. And of course, the 8 is reacting and sort of exploding on everyone. And so we need to talk about how we could, you're the person they need to process this with, not everyone else, not exploding on them. And that 4 that you love so much, they're imploding. They're taking it all in. You need to kind of be gentle and get in there with them and say, it's okay. You can tell me, and let them have a safe space to be able to say, I'm done. I can't do this. It's over. You know, and let them just say a whole lot of horrible things, you know. They really just need to do that. You need to be the safe person that they can say it to and then kind of walk forward with them. And then your 6 is going to do a little bit of both. They're going to explode a little on others and implode a little. And it's a lot like with the 4. Get in there with them. You know, I'm a safe person you can talk to. Help them to be able to see ahead so that they don't do dumb things that they'll regret later just because they were overreacting. If you love a 6, if there's a 6 you're dealing with, your rule is don't react to their overreacting. They're just going to overreact, okay? And we just get over it. The 6s that I love, I just try to be kind of breezy sometimes, you know. I want to be sensitive and kind, but just kind of, yeah, okay. You can help them kind of explore things and be with them in it. So as you're thinking about these things, then one of the great functions of having a spiritual direction, a type approach to life, is that you're always helping people explore resistance. Now, what I mean by that, resistance is I don't want to go to church. I don't want to serve anymore in such and such. I don't want to be friends with that person. I hate the pastor, all that kind of stuff. You know what? What we do in the Christian circles is we just should on people. You shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't do this. You want to be the kind of person that can explore the resistance. And if you know their Enneagram type, that's going to help you. You want to just look at them and say, okay, so like, why would you feel that way? What is that really about? Because sometimes there's something really going on in there that's really beautiful. I had a directee who was a 5, and she resisted any thought that God wanted to be with her. And of course, our 5s can be very withholding, very much into scarcity, not engaging with people. And that whole idea that God wanted to be with her, she would just look at me like, I don't think so. But she was such a good Christian, of course, she couldn't say that. And she would just give me that. So finally I thought, how are we going to do this? And I said, okay, let's pretend for a minute. And I pointed to the center of the room where we were. I said, let's pretend for a minute that Jesus is in the center of this room. And I said, where are you? And she sat there for a minute and she said, oh, I'm not next to him. She said, I'm over in the corner watching him. Well, that fits a 5 exactly, doesn't it? And I said, okay. I said, well, what would need to happen for you to want to even come over and talk to Jesus? And she said, I don't know. And she sat there for a while, and then finally she said, he has to look at me, and he has to see me. I'm watching him, but is he watching me? That isolation of the 5. And you know, I wouldn't have gotten that. I wouldn't have thought to ask that question, but I knew I had a 5 on my hands. And she's just going to withhold and withdraw. It's going to take her a while to even want to be with Jesus, even though she was this big Christian leader. So you want to be able to help them with that. You also want to notice with the people you work with, they're going to live on their lines. You know, I like to be really goofy. It gives me a relief from all my resentment, judgment, and all that. And I'm living on my line to 7. That's my security point. You may remember we talked about that. And so you want to know that about your directee. You want to spot, oh, they're living on their security point. They're living on their stress point. And see, okay, I see where we're going with that. I have a friend who's a 3, and just watching her move to 6, because she's gung-ho. She's got this parachurch organization. She could run the world, really. And then working with her, she's moving to 6, the security point, where she can be more cautious, where she can think things through. She actually, as we talked about things, and she was able to move to that space, she actually asked someone else to be the director of the organization so that she would be free to do more of the things that she's really called to do. If you really want to think about how to work with someone, I highly recommend the book Enneagram Made Easy. There's a section in that book under each type that says how to get along with me. Oh, it's great. You read it, and especially if you're working with someone and they just make you crazy. 3s often can sound like narcissists, and then you read the How to Get Along with Me, and it says, I really just would like to have people's approval. I'm not conceited. Please just like me. It's just so funny. I'm reading it going, oh, I never thought of that. Okay, and the questioner, the 6, that whole idea of, just be with me while I just kind of like freak out now and then. Could you just be with me in that? My 1s, my 1 directees, they just want to argue with me sometimes. And I just have to learn to just kind of stay light, because see, they want to be right no matter what. And so I don't challenge them a whole lot on certain things. In fact, when they get something right, I try to go, there you go. That would be good. Then I want us to think a little bit about the temptations and how we experience each type. And you have on your handouts the different types and how you might react to that type and how you experience that type. Uh, and the type that you would react to most. So I just would urge you to pause the video and look at your handout and just look at the different types. Um, is Who are you going to react to? Who is going to be a problem for you? Are you going to feel shut out by the 5 because they're so difficult? You keep having to ask them about their feelings. Are you going to be annoyed with the 4 and just cross them off and decide they're self-absorbed? So if you would just take a minute and pause and just look at how they are and what might turn out to be irritating to you. And now that you're back, I would just urge you to just think about how might you pray for that person. Look at that person's virtue. What are they moving toward? How might God want to use you in that person's life to move towards that virtue? And then finally, just the Myers-Briggs. It can be very helpful. It's really only about outward behavior and about how people make decisions and how they relate to the world. It's very different from Enneagram, which is about motives. And so what you want to do is be able to look at that, and it can help you suggest practices. For example, if you have a directee who's an extrovert, they're probably going to want to do group Lexio. That's going to work much better for them than individual Lexio. You might want to help them get some resources on group Lexio. If you have the N versus S, the S is going to need to take in the world. Sometimes they need to just go for a run and talk to God as they go for the run. Walking prayer is really good, whereas your N is going to be much better at curling up, in some sort of place and having this great time with God. And journaling might work for both, but for your S, it might be more likely something more creative. And well, either one could be creative, but it'll just look different. You want to be mindful of that, because the S is very practical and wants to look at the senses of the world and be able to be out in nature. And the N is pretty much just going to live in their head. And so it'll look different. The feeling and the thinking, that's just about how they make their decisions. I know a lot of feelers who are brilliant theologians. So this isn't about smart and not smart. It's just about how you make your decisions. And some of your feelers who are making their decisions based on their feelings, they have pretty good intuition. But you want to be able maybe to question them a little on the thinking, but they usually are doing that. With your thinkers, say, okay, let's walk that out. How are you going to feel afterwards if you do that? Oh, well, I haven't thought about feeling. I just do whatever is reasonable. And then your J and your P, that's all about closure. Your J's are going to rush to the deadline. They will probably run over people, not willing to be interrupted, and you want to help them be able to say, what if we paused? What if we did that a little bit more slowly? And then the P's, they just need for you to kind of sit with them and go, they need sometimes to move towards the deadline. So, well, if you were to do that, what do you think would be your next step? Or what would that look like? So you just want to be able to be with them. And then just something about Myers-Briggs that's interesting is that often around the age of 35 or midlife, people go through a crisis. It's sort of like going through the wall and they completely flip. I'm an INTJ, and I'd always had, very intellectual type times with God and everything. I went through my wall, completely freaked out, and just kind of turned into an SP. All I could do was hike and talk to God. It was just, sometimes that we need to visit like our shadow side and go over there for a while, because the way we've been connecting with God we've burned out on it. We've worn it out, and we need to go somewhere else for a while. And so you want to know your directees, or whoever you're working with. You want to know their Myers-Briggs and just, oh, is it time to go the other way? Or if they're depressed, they usually need to go back to the safe practices, the safe things that work for them, the things that they've done over the years that really work. A good example, and I'll just kind of close with this example. My wild and crazy 7 directee, Hi J, got up every morning and went through her long list of Navigator's verses. That's what she had done forever. Did that. She went through a huge crisis in her life. Her world fell apart. And she came and she said, I can't do the verses. I can't do anything anymore. And so I pulled out, and I highly recommend, and we'll put it as a supplemental resource, Rembrandt's painting, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. And there's a place in there where there's one side of the picture is very bright and it's full of chaos. And I pulled it out and I pointed to that side and I said, here's where you're living and it's a mess. And then I pointed to the other side of the painting where it's quiet and Jesus is there. And I said, and this is where Jesus is. And I said, here's where you are and Jesus is inviting you over here. And it isn't easy for you to get up and walk over there, but you might think about it. You might. And she said, can I have that? And I said, yeah, sure, I gave it. And I gave it to her. For the next 3 years, all she could do every morning was get out the painting and move from the chaotic side to the peaceful side. And she would text me and she'd say, I'm sitting with Jesus on the peaceful side today. Sometimes we just need to do something that's very different from what we've always done before. That was very artsy, very, very different. And you need to just be listening to the Spirit. I don't know where that idea came from. But I do think God gave it to me. And you want to be able to be there with people. You want to be able, if you're designing practices like for a large group of people that you're working with, bring in all different kinds. Consider that there's people that will get that piece of art. And there's some people who just will want to do the verses. But ask God to show you, what do the people in front of you need?